This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
China will build Hainan into a free trade port on the front line of the country's integration into the global economic system. Financial opening, zero tariffs, and preferential policies for foreign investment are planned for the coming years. But as a middle-ranking province for economic growth, how can Hainan compete with other free trade zones and financial centers in China? Will it be a competitor with Hong Kong? And what impact will its free trade port have for China's further reform and opening up? To discuss these issues and more, I'm now joined by Professor Jun Qian, Executive Dean of the Fanhai International School of Finance at Fudan University, Hong Hao, Chief Strategist at the Bank of Communications International, and Professor Tan Keen Yap, Chairman of the Singapore National Committee for the Pacific Economic Cooperation Council. That is our topic today. This is Dialogue. I'm Zhong Shi in Beijing. Thank you so much for joining us, gentlemen. Professor Tan, I want to go straight to you. China has had a number of free trade zones, often a part of an urban area in Shanghai in Guangdong province, and now Hainan will be built into a free trade port. What are the differences in addition to size and area will there be between a free trade zone and a free trade port?
Of course, it is very different. You have 18 free trade zones, but this is your first ever free trade port. When I first heard about the details, where you allow gradual easing of capital account, you will allow for cross-border flows of capital, and you allow for those who residing more than 181 days, only 15% in personal income tax, and you allow these modern services. You allow duty-free goods. When I heard about that, I got excited because, Hainan Island was given such a good and flexible policies, and if you do it properly, you can literally compete with any free port, including Singapore or Hong Kong. But of course, the very important question is, how do you implement those policies in terms of governance, in terms of attracting the necessary talent, in terms of having a working population which is bilingual if you want to link to the world in English, and how this will not degenerate into another manufacturing hub, or this will not become another property bubble speculation. I think so. Implementation is most important. But Hainan Island is very lucky. You have this comprehensive policy flexibility given from the central government. So again, I think you need a very proactive leadership in Hainan Island to see this through right all the way to 2050 if I look at the blueprint. So this is a very exciting moment, and it will take some time to materialize. So let's see how the implementation, what are the challenges that we will confront. We can talk about that.
We'll talk about Hainan and Hong Kong and Hainan and Singapore later on in our program. But for now, I want to come to Mr. Hong in Hong Kong. In your observation, in China's experience running all of those free trade zones, are there lessons and experiences China can draw in now implementing the policies set out in that blueprint for Hainan as a free trade port?
Yeah, well, we had a number of experiments before. I think they succeeded, to various degree. Firstly, we have the Hong Kong Free Trade Zone, which has been in place for a number of years now. I think it is an experience that shows, to establish a free trade zone and to also, working despite your existing well-entrenched trade practices, it's going to take some time. All right, so the Shanghai Free Trade Zone has been in place, but I would say that the trade volume is being handled by that zone and also its overall importance and contribution to the system, I think for now is rather limited. And there are other special economic zone as well in the past that has been designed for various purposes. But I think just now your guest just now hit the nail on the head right there, which is the implementation and execution of the policy. So we've seen even in the eastern border of China, some cities, for example, Shantou and also Zhuhai, which are two of the earlier specially designed special economic area, and they sort of succeeded only to a very limited degree. So I think it remains to be seen how much time you will need to implement and execute those policies.
Professor Qian, you're based in Shanghai. Can I also get your take, very briefly, if you will, on how the Shanghai Pilot free trade zone has worked and whether anything can be learned from running that zone and other free trade zones in China to implementing what's been laid out in the plans to run a free trade port in Hainan?
Sure. So if you look at the Shanghai Free Trade Zone, a very important part is the financial system. The idea is that within the free trade zone, investors and firms in the zone are basically connected to the global markets. And in fact, outside the zone, with the rest of Shanghai and the rest of China, there's actually a wall, if you will, right? Because we know that there's a system in place to manage capital account, for example. So the free trade zone in Shanghai, really, it's like a hub. It's kind of a hub in between what's called an offshore center and an onshore center, right? It's offshore in the sense that there is connecting channels with inland areas, but the center within the free trade zone, because it's connected to the global markets, you can do a lot of transactions directly with global participants. As Dr. Hong pointed out, one of the problems, you look at Shanghai, is that the trading volumes, the size of issuance of Chinese and foreign companies in terms of issuing bonds, the size of this transaction has been limited due to a number of reasons. The other thing is that obviously Shanghai itself has a relatively developed economy. So for all of that, I agree with Professor Tan that Hainan actually provides a brand new opportunity. It has great potential because it's a much larger area. The important thing is the entire island, rather than a little section of the city in Shanghai, that's going to be 100% designated as the free port. So that's very different. The other thing that's very important is that, as I say, Shanghai has a already very developed economy in terms of industrial structure. It's very hard to make fundamental changes to the local economy. But Hainan is very different. Basically, you can design what's it going to be like. Real economy is going to be very important. This is not going to be simply a tax haven. Modern services is important. High tech is very important. Of course, everything related to trade. So that's also very important because in some sense, on such a big island, everything starts from scratch. You can design, if you design properly and implement properly, that's I agree, is very important. Hainan can become a very different economy on itself in 10 or 15 years.
Professor Qian, many of the things you said will happen for Hainan and on a larger scale. I wonder, in your opinion, how much potential does Hainan have when it comes to a financial system? Because in the plan, what's going to happen for Hainan is the free flow of capital and as you mentioned, the gradual opening of capital accounts in Hainan. Help us understand how that's going to work in terms of financial system support for the development of Hainan, because for a true free trade port, you cannot just have zero tariffs. You're going to have the support of a financial system.
Okay. Maybe I
Sure.
will first sorry. You're not
Professor
talking to
Chen,
me?
please. Professor Tan, I'll come to you later. Professor
Okay.
Chen,
Yeah,
Shanghai.
okay.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sure Professor Tan will have important insights. So again, my understanding of the design is that the island itself, the whole island is going to be the free port. Now, once the infrastructure is set up, so if you look at the documents, the first 5 years between now and 2025, that's the first phase. We're building a foundation. So the idea is that once the infrastructure is up, then the entire island is the free port. And the idea is that for all the firms, investors, and Chinese companies or foreign companies, global companies, once you set it up there, you can operate, you can connect freely, basically, to the entire world, to Hong Kong, to US, to Europe, Singapore, everywhere, right? So the financial system on the island within the port is one that's open to the world. You can imagine that transactions will be done in RMB, in dollar, in euro, and so on and so forth, right? The other part that's also very crucial, as I've been saying that Shanghai has been doing, is that while the port, the island itself has a very open and global financial system, how it then connects with other parts of China, how it connects with Shenzhen, how it connects with the greater Bay Area, that's up to careful design. So when we say the capital account of China will be gradually open, it's more about connecting Hainan, the free port, with other parts of China. So as I've been saying, that's going to be a gradual process. There is going to be, in some sense, a wall in terms of not all the capital will flow between the island and other parts of China. That's going to be a gradual process. That said, of course, it's very, very important for the island, for the free port itself, has enough very, very well qualified global financial institutions. It's very important for the regulatory agencies to monitor all the transactions to control risk. And then it's very important to have a large body of qualified finance professionals to operate in the island. All of those conditions are there. Then you can imagine that the financial system should work very well in that the volume, again, this is very important, the volume of transactions will go up very quickly. It should become very global in that we should expect that as many, if not more, global institutions conducting businesses on the island within the port relative to the other parts. Even if you look at Shanghai today, a large portion of the transactions are still done by Chinese institutions.
I see, Professor Chen.
I'll
come back to you later. And Professor Tan, I know that you wanted to weigh in on this as well to facilitate all of the free trade and transactions on the island. Like Professor Chen talked about just a minute ago, we need that crucial financial system and all of those professional services that come with, for example, your financing professionals, your legal firms and accounting firms, all of that. Your take on this, on the establishment of a system that will facilitate all of the ambitious plans?
Yeah, let me put it this way. Let me look at two perspectives. Let's talk about the potential as a result of this policy blueprint from the central government. If you look at Shanghai and Hong Kong is the offshore financial center. Shanghai is very much an onshore. So Singapore is the offshore financial center. So what you are given to Shanghai, literally Shanghai can play the role as an offshore financial center. In order to do it well, I think I should imagine that People's Bank of China would have to have a sub-office there to really making sure that the administration, the implementation will be efficient, will be fast. And therefore, I think there are a few potential I can see currently, for example, that internationalize of RMB, issuing a bonds denominated in RMB can take place in Shanghai because of the capital flows and gradual capital account liberalization will be allowed. And also that the Belt and Road initiatives, for those Chinese funds that go to countries in Belt and Road initiative, 65% went to Hong Kong, 35% went to Singapore. So I think Hainan should, given the policy, will be able to compete with Singapore and Hong Kong in handling those Belt and Road funds that are going from China into the Belt and Road countries in the rest of the world. Now, so I think that is one potential that we would like to see. But certainly for Hainan Island as a free port with all these capital reform initiatives and the tax-free status, that I will foresee that Hainan Island will be on services, modern services, and there are huge potential where Hainan Island can differentiate from the rest of the 18 economic zones, rather than when you are a free port. That I think in terms of modern services, I can see first financial services for sure, then education services. And I want to talk a little bit about this. You see, I think Lee Kuan Yew, our founding father Lee Kuan Yew, ever said that before, that if Shanghai were to be an international financial hub, onshore and offshore, he said that you need 1 million bankers or those who work in financial services who are bilingual in English and in Chinese or Mandarin. So I foresee that if Shanghai want to play that role as a global services island, free ports, you need enough people to come to Shanghai who are bilingual. But the question is, come to Hainan as bilingual. But then again, there are 10 million population in Hainan. You need to think of how these local people will be trained, and then how the foreign talent will be attracted, so that you make the local people also accept these changes. And being a modern healthcare services to cater for the middle class in China.
I hear you. Training locals and attracting talent from other places. It is a fascinating topic, really. People hear freight trade port and they immediately think about trading hubs, regional trading hubs, and that's Hong Kong and Singapore. And for that, I want to now come to Mr. Hong Hao. We have heard from senior Chinese officials that Hainan will not compete with Hong Kong. It will only complement Hong Kong once all of these policies, proposed policies, are implemented and executed. What is your understanding on the relationship between Hainan and Hong Kong?
Yeah, I think with all very good policy intents, I think for now, for the next 5-10 years, it will be very difficult for Hainan to compete with Hong Kong, even for Shanghai after 20 years, 30 years in the making, and also millions of financial professionals actually working in that city. And now the city is like with a population of 20 million plus, and a gigantic financial industry. The Shanghai Stock Exchange is actually larger in terms of market capitalization than Hong Kong. But then at the same time, I just give you one example. When the U.S. listed Chinese companies coming back to China to get listed here, they chose Hong Kong instead of Shanghai. So that really tells you how much easier for a foreign investors to be participating in Hong Kong versus in Shanghai. And that is the reality that we have to face. To build up a financial hub, not only you need to put in the policy, the capital, and attract talents to come, but also you need to build up international and global credibility. It takes a long time. And I think Hong Kong has been in Asia for as a financial center for China for a number of years, and now at this critical juncture, it's actually proving its worth by having the U.S. listed Chinese companies to come back here to get listed, and many of the very good, famous, excellent Chinese internet companies are coming back here. So I would say that I think for now, let's focus on build up the infrastructure. Especially the soft infrastructure for Hainan first, before we even think about to stretch our imagination to compete with Hong Kong and Singapore.
I think many would echo your views that in the short term, at least, Hainan will not catch up with Hong Kong. Hong Kong wasn't built overnight. You said that. I certainly see Professor Chen nodding there when you talked about that. And also, Hong Kong has had a strong track record of credibility and integrity for it to get to where it is today. But just for discussion's sake, I want to come to Professor Chen now. Let's take a second and take a look at what Hong Kong really is today. It is a key financial center in the world. It is a trading and shipping hub in the region. It is a shopping heaven. Now, in any of these areas, do you see Hainan maybe rival with Hong Kong in the future, in the mid to long term, if not in the short term?
Certainly, it's actually possible in all of these areas, but I agree with the two other guests. I will actually offer a slightly different perspective on the relationship between Hainan, Hong Kong, and Singapore. As we say, it's not a zero-sum game, right? You know, the Chinese economy is still growing. The size of the Chinese economy is second largest. It's going to catching up to the U.S. More importantly, if you see the numbers of the first quarter, the largest trading partner with China is not the U.S., not EU, but Asian countries. So not only China, but Southeast Asia, Japan, Korea, the Asian economies are now the driving force for global growth, for consumption. And that's going to continue in the next 20, 30 years. So I see the pie to be growing. As long as the pie is growing, in fact, we can have another, even two more Hong Kong or Singapore. That's certainly possible. So in that regard, Hainan will not necessarily take away the business from Hong Kong and Singapore, just because this whole area, the Asian economy, is still growing very fast. It's by far the most promising in terms of growth around the whole world.
I see.
So that's one point I want to make. And obviously, if you look at the location of Hainan, we know that Singapore and Hong Kong are very important ports. So is Shanghai. But you know, this trading route from, for example, Europe and Middle East go through Singapore to Chinese cities. They also go to Japan. They go to Korea. But Hainan is located right in the middle, right? So geographically, it is located at a very attractive location. Two, it's very large because the whole island is free port. You know, you could have multiple ports. And three, as I said, certainly there's a lot of makeup work to do in terms of training people.
I see.
Right? But the advantage is that with such a big island, you can start from scratch. When you start from scratch, you can actually design systems to make modern services, at least certain types of modern services, to be of the best practice, and that gives room for a very quick growth. So we can see that while overall, especially as a financial center, I agree that it's going to take some time before you can even talk about similar to Hong Kong or Singapore.
I see.
But in some areas of services, it's conceivable that maybe in 10 years, as long as you can attract enough companies. And the other thing that's very important that they're doing, they realize what they're doing, is that the rules and regulations, they will borrow, if you will. They will borrow from the best practice around the globe. In terms,
Professor Chen, you have a very good point.
disputes.
I think the attraction of a talent for the island of Hainan. Hold on a second, we'll be talking about that in just a moment. Here on Dialogue, we value the input and opinions of our viewers. That's why we've been monitoring your comments on social media. As always, let's take a look at what some of our viewers have been saying on social media about this very subject, Hainan to be built into a free trade port. Chen He-Xing says, to be honest, I am looking forward to the establishment of Hainan Free Trade Port because I have confidence in the government and its policies. However, the reality is cruel. It is quite difficult for Hainan to grow rapidly in the short term, and education and healthcare are still lagging behind. In particular, the environment in Hainan is so comfortable, and therefore people tend to be lazy and less productive. That is so real, and that is, what people consider, what they mull over when they decide whether to go to Hainan. Mr. Hong, I want to go to you now. Hong Kong traditionally has been a big magnet for outside talent, and now we have the Greater Bay Area at just a stone throw away from Hainan. What will make Hainan appealing for people, for young talent?
Wow, I think it goes hand in hand. Whoever goes there first, the pioneers would have to probably suffer the most, but then at the same time probably take the most of the reward. But I think initially, at the initial stage of development, it's going to be tough. I think one of the policies that is doing it right is to set a very low income tax rate for professionals working there. And also for corporates working there, it has a very low corporate income tax rate as well. So I think for some corporates, it could be enough reason to relocate to there. But then at the same time, you have to build out, for example, the infrastructure. Also, amongst other things. Just to give you an example, if you want to fly from Hong Kong to Hainan, there's only one direct flight every day, one flight. All right, so even if you want to take a holiday now from Hong Kong to Hainan, it's very difficult. So in terms of integration, because Hainan is an island, don't forget, even though it's a very large island, but it is an island. So geographical location, there is an isolation, a physical isolation there. Well, if you look at the Macau, Hong Kong, Shenzhen, Guangzhou area, there's bridge, there's road, and there's railway, high-speed railway that is connecting all these great cities. So I think, at this stage, we have to face the reality that there are competitions in China between cities and between regions. I think Hainan definitely gets a favorable policy at this stage. But I think the other special areas, special zones are getting some head start, and Hainan has to catch up. But I think with a very strong policy help and also capital investments and all that, Hainan could catch up, in the years to come.
Professor Tan, you brought this up many times in our discussion. The implementation of these policies will determine what Hainan will look like in the future. And to implement these policies, you're going to need people, talented people, and local government. It depends a lot on their governors as well. So on this topic of talent and governance, your take, and are there lessons Hainan can learn from Singapore?
Okay, when I look at this Hainan Island, what comes to my mind from a Singapore perspective, if Hainans want to be successful, firstly is the leadership, and secondly is a governance, and the third one is the lessons, how you can shorten the learning curve. Now, leadership, if you have a strong leadership, a leadership that will make things happen, I think that will cut short the time to achieve your objective. And then the leadership must have very good governance, high degree of governance and transparency, make the rules and regulations so clear, and no hanky-panky, good governance. So that's the second part. And the third part is nowadays, it will take shorter to do something well than in the past. Hong Kong has been a financial center for a long time, but Singapore, independent in 1965, it took us about 20 years to be a viable financial hub. And now we are challenging Hong Kong and many Tokyo as a financial center. So the learning curve now is much shorter than Singapore used to go through. So there are good experiences, good case studies that Hainan can look at. So if you have this good leadership, high governance, sound governance with transparency and sharing of experience, I think things can move faster. But of course, by the end of the day,
I see. Professor Tan, we're running out of time here on this broadcast. I appreciate it. This is a fascinating topic. We have covered much ground, but have left also a lot untouched. I hope to get all of your insight later on in our program. And that wraps up this edition of Dialogue on CGTN. My thanks to all three of my guests and for your company.